Oh, hello YouTube. Today on the Naughty Librarian, we are continuing on my Vampire Chronicles read-along recap series, and today we are talking about Blood Canticle by Anne Rice. So Blood Canticle was originally the end of the Vampire Chronicles series. I think like maybe over 10 years later, she put out a few more books, but this was originally the end of the series. So it does feel a lot like a conclusion, and after reading it, I gotta say, I kind of really like it. There are some very divisive viewpoints on this book. Some people either really love it or they really hate it, from what I have heard. For me, though, like, I actually kind of really like it. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so let's just talk about what happened in Blood Canticle. Blood Canticle is being exclusively narrated by Lestat. We haven't really had a Lestat heavy narration in like a minute, so it's nice getting back to Lestat's viewpoint, his tone of voice. And honestly, it's right here in the beginning of the book that a lot of people either liked it or didn't like it. Because Lestat is feeling super introspective. Is he still the Brat Prince? Yes, he is. We all know and love him as that. However, he's also like looking inward and trying to figure out who he really is. There's an ongoing theme in the book where Lestat wants to be sainted. He wants to be canonized as a saint for all of his good deeds and have the world love him because he's their savior, etc., etc. Lestat knows this will never actually happen because, one, vampire. Two, he knows himself well enough to know he's a selfish, vicious creature and he will never be sainted. So a lot of the book is kind of around the nature of fame and also Lestat growing a moral compass when he's never had one. And speaking of fame, a lot of it is Lestat waxing poetic on the nature of fame because he has all of these fans all over the world, because mind you, he wrote all these Vampire Chronicle books. On the one hand, loves his fandom. He loves these people because they worship him. They give him something that he needs. He needs this like recognition and this fame. He also hates them all. Because as much as they like worship him and love him and give him all this attention that he craves, they don't fucking understand him in the least. Everyone misinterprets what he's saying. They like pick up on the flash and pomp and the Brat Prince, but they don't actually get to know like this person growing a moral compass underneath it all. And also, this book gets really self-referential for a bit because also Lestat starts going on and on about how people didn't like Memnoch the Devil, but like y'all bought the book anyway, so whatever, I got your money still. And it's obviously like Anne injecting herself into the story because Memnoch the Devil was not met with a lot of critical success, let's say. I mean, it sold a lot of copies, but not a lot of people loved it because it's so weird and doesn't belong in the Vampire Chronicles, if I'm being honest, but like, okay. And it's kind of funny that it's put into this book as a way to just air her grievances. It's like, we get it, Anne. You're a little sore about Memnoch the Devil, but it's been years at this point. Like, maybe let it go. So I think at this point in the book, like, if you were not in it for the self-referential nature of it and Lestat using his own acerbic voice to like talk about his moral compass and like how he views the world, you are not gonna like this book at all because that's kind of the running theme of the book. However, for me, I really like Lestat's tone of voice. I like how Anne writes him because he's such an unabashed asshole, but at the same time, lovable. He's like a villain you want to root for. So he's very carefully crafted. So that being said, it starts off Lestat. He's telling the story, he's talking about the nature of fame. However, as far as plot goes, this book starts off exactly where Blackwood Farm ended, with Lestat asking Mona, do you want to be a vampire? And she's saying yes because she's literally dying. So he turns her into a vampire, and this is what happens after that. Mona awakens as a vampire. She fills back out. Mind you, she was dying. She was wasting away. She was probably about 70 pounds at the time that she was made into a vampire, but she puts back on that weight real quick, so now she's like all full health again. So it's a big change. You know, Mona needs a minute to like kind of wrap her brain around this. And of course, with perfect timing here, guess who shows up at Blackwood Farm right after Mona's already a vampire? Nothing to be done about it. Well, Rowan Mayfair shows up. And she's like, I need to bring Mona back to the hospital. She's dying. Like, what the fuck? Like, let her go. And Lestat is so charming that somehow he convinces Rowan to like, listen, she's fine for right now. We're taking care of her. Just let her be with Quinn because they're in love. This is where she wants to be. And he talks Rowan into this somehow. I think with a bit of like vampire charm, honestly. And also Lestat and Rowan just have instant chemistry with each other. And like, I get it. Both of them have just seen way too much shit to be, you know, an optimistic ingenue about the world anymore. They're more a bit world weary. So I get it. They have chemistry. They're very kindred in a way. So all of this goes together to make Rowan feel more comfortable with leaving Mona there. So Rowan agrees and she leaves Mona there so she could be with Quinn, and she'll come back whenever she needs to, etc. So Rowan ends up leaving. Lestat goes back upstairs to go check on Mona, his new fledgling. And like I was mentioning earlier, Mona's having a lot of big feels right now. You know, she was dying for years. And she was like literally on death's doorstep here. The only thing keeping her alive at that point was like sheer force of will and a little bit of magic. And now all of a sudden she is in full health again, has all of her body weight back. Her body is like functioning again. And now she's a vampire. She's seeing colors she couldn't have even imagined before. Like a lot has just happened in a very short amount of time. She's not necessarily taking it well at the moment, but Lestat, he's also like big brother to Quinn and Mona. I really like his relationship with them, even though he's so much older than them. Physically speaking, he looks to be about their age. You know, Lestat was turned when he was like 20, so they all look like they could be buddies. So Lestat, he puts on his big brother cap and he starts giving Mona a pep talk. And he's like, listen, Mona, you're Mona fucking Mayfair. You're the baddest little witch in town. You need to get your shit together. Don't let anyone tell you you're not the baddest witch in town. You're awesome. And honestly, it helps Mona a little bit just to have someone else acknowledge that like she can do this. So she's like, okay, all right. I'm feeling a little bit better. She goes and puts on her big witch pants and she's ready to, you know, face her future. So step one on the vampire journey is learning how to hunt properly. So Lestat, he takes both Quinn and Mona under his big brother vampire wing and he's like, I'm going to teach you the proper way to hunt because Mona's never learned, and frankly, Quinn had a really piss poor education. So they start heading into New Orleans to go, you know, get some dinner. And Lestat and Quinn start telepathically picking up on a pair of other vampires stomping around New Orleans, which everyone in the vampire world knows is Lestat's territory. And they're walking around being little punk bitches, just killing anybody willy-nilly, killing innocent people. They're being rotten little bad house guests. And like Quinn and Lestat are immediately like, oh, we gotta go get rid of these motherfuckers. They are messing things up here. They are horrible. Lestat's like, Mona, guess what? We're hunting vampires tonight. We are skipping ahead several lessons, but it's also important to know how to defend yourself against other vampires. It's easy to defend yourself against humans. They're weaker. Vampires, it's gonna be a fair fight. So they catch up to the punk bitch vampires in like a hotel room, right? And they had kidnapped several local children and had been like beating them and drinking them and just rocking out to music. They're just dancing and having a great time. Like I said, they're evil punk bitch vampires. We do not like them. And Lestat, he just like knocks down the door and he's like, the fuck you think you're doing in my town, homie? And the other vampires are super big Lestat fans and they're like, oh my god, it's Lestat, we're your biggest fans. We came here to like worship you. You're the best vampire in the world. And like we read in your books that you had eaten children before, so we're just like doing what you did. And Lestat is just like, are you incapable of reading comprehension? Because I didn't brag about eating fucking kids. Like, I'm not proud of this. I think it was very clear in the literature. You know what? Fuck it. Quinn, Mona, go drain these jabronis. I'm not dealing with this. They're too stupid to live. So Quinn and Mona proceed to kill the other vampires. They eat them, and then Lestat uses his fire gift to burn the remains so there's nothing nothing there besides a little bit of ash left. And then they go check on the children that were there, and they're like, okay, well, you know what? They're all knocked out, but they're all alive. So he calls down to the front desk and is like, hey, I found a bunch of missing children in a hotel room. You could come get them. And they're like, hangs up, and they all just leave. So, he did a good deed for the night. He killed bad guys, and he saved a bunch of, random kids that they were torturing. So, again, he's exploring his moral compass and also talking about the nature of his own fame, where he loves being worshipped, but he hates the people who worship him. Again, running themes throughout this whole book. So now that they've had their dinner, it's time to go back home and rest for a minute, digest, I suppose. So they go back to Lestat's house in New Orleans. And they all kind of settle in. Quinn and Mona are off doing Quinn and Mona things, and Lestat's, by himself. So he's like, Quinn, Mona, I'm leaving. I'll see you tomorrow. So he leaves his apartment, and he's wandering around. He's like, okay, well, where am I going to go during the day? And he's like, oh, I got it. I'm going to go up to the Talamasca headquarters in New Orleans and go visit Sterling. Lestat, this is maybe not the best decision. But he goes and he meets up with Sterling, and he's like, so Sterling, guess what? Mona Mayfair's a vampire now. I just wanted you to know before you find out from somewhere else, but yeah, she's a vampire. And Sterling is like, yeah, I know. I was the one who told you she was dying, remember? Sterling kind of wanted this to happen because he really cared about Mona a lot, and this was an opportunity to save her life. So, he kind of orchestrated this in a bit. I don't know if he's necessarily approves of it, but he's complicit in it. Since Lestat and Sterling are kind of buddies at this point, Lestat's like, can I have a sleepover? Can I stay here during the daytime? And Sterling's like, yeah, sure, come on in. And so this is a big trust situation on both their parts. One, Sterling is trusting Lestat not to murder everyone in the Talamasca house. And Lestat is trusting Sterling not to take his unconscious body and lock it in a cell so they can do medical experiments on it. Trust goes both ways here. So Lestat, he wakes up when it's nighttime, and he feels the presence of Rowan and Michael Mayfair in the Talamasca house. He goes downstairs and he meets up with Rowan and Michael, who are talking to Sterling. Again, Rowan and Lestat intensely drawn to each other for multiple reasons we've kind of gone over, but also, Lestat's seen a lot of shit, but he's never seen something quite like Rowan. And for Rowan, Lestat, he's just a puzzle she can't figure out. And also, he has Mona, and she wants Mona back, and Lestat won't give Mona back to her. So she is getting a bit upset at this situation. And the thing with Rowan, when she gets upset, is that she has mind powers that kill people. So Lestat keeps feeling like a burning sensation. And apparently it's Rowan trying to use her, mind abilities on him. But technically, Lestat, he's already dead. So it's not like she can double kill him or really affect his body anymore because he's not technically living. So it's even more confusing to her. She's like, I am using a lot of my abilities and it's not bothering you. And then on top of everything else, Rowan is also lashing out at people because she feels very guilty for Mona wanting to run away in the first place, because apparently what had happened was Rowan, with her mind killing abilities, was going to use them on Mona. Because Mona had been dying very painfully for a long time, Rowan was just gonna, slip in and just use her abilities to make it quick and painless kind of a thing. Kind of showing a mercy towards her. However, Mona's a witch too. She knows what's going on, and she got really frightened of Rowan. She's like, what the fuck are you doing? So they had this whole situation where Rowan was gonna kill Mona, and Mona knew about it. So their relationship is having problems right now. They are not on speaking terms for a good reason. And then right after that experience, the next day, Mona ran off. But Lestat isn't ready to tell them that Mona's a vampire, so he can't just say I'll send Mona home. So he's just listen, Mona's fine. We're taking good care of her, and she will reach out when she's ready. That's the best I can do, lady. And honestly, it's not helping because Rowan is just still very upset by this because it's not an answer. And it's just keeping this situation super tense. So Lestat makes the best decision he could have made and says, like, you know what, I'm just gonna head out. I feel like I've done enough here today. Lestat, he leaves the Talamasca, he goes back home, and he checks in on Quinn and Mona. And so far, you know, they're doing really great. They're like living in Lestat's place. They're young, they're in love. They're like, you know, moving in, and like Mona's decided to start writing her memoirs. Like, they're having a fine time. They're okay. You know what I mean? As far as, you know, teenage vampires can be. But, you know, Lestat does have some type of feelings for Rowan, and he does feel bad that Rowan's like really suffering a lot about this. So Lestat's like, Mona, could you please just call Rowan and Michael and tell them you're okay? Like, she's really worried about you, and like it's causing me stress, it's causing her stress. Just call and say like, hey, I'm okay. So Mona's like, all right, fine. So she calls, right? And the conversation goes something like this. Hi, Rowan. I'm fine. Talk later. Love you. Bye. Which is just poking the bear when it comes to Rowan. It's not really a surprise when a very short time later, guess who's forcing her way past the guards at Lestat's house? Well, it's a very pissed off Rowan with Michael along with her. And this is about to be a very awkward situation because they see Mona, and guess what? Mona looks amazing. She's in perfect health, and like Michael is just happy. He's like, oh my gosh, you're healthy again. I'm happy. I don't care how this happened. He's just like looking at the positives here. However, Rowan just is apoplectic about it. She can't fathom how this happened. Also, she's a witch, so she can tell that Mona is not Mona. Like, she's different, fundamentally different down to a cellular level. She can tell immediately. So she is really weirded out and super enraged by this situation. And Mona, she like tries to go in for a hug, and Rowan literally recoils away. Lestat is watching this situation going, oh, this is about to go south quick. So Lestat, he steps in to like defuse the situation. So he kind of like mind enchants Rowan, like they mind meld, and he's like putting all this information into her brain telepathically. And he's like, hey, rest, everything's gonna be okay. Like, she's healthy, don't worry about it, and Michael will take you back home and you can sleep and it'll be good. And then Rowan, I guess, is just accepting this in her brain, so she just kind of falls asleep, and Michael carries her back to the car and they go home. However, this wasn't necessarily a fix to the situation. It was more like slapping a band-aid over a hole in a dam. Like, it stopped the water for a second, but like, yikes, is not gonna fix it. Because like the next day, Michael shows back up and he's like, listen, you guys gotta come over to the Mayfair house. Rowan is having a full psychotic break, like the same psychotic break she had after the whole Lasher incident. Like, it's bad. And this time, you know what, it's even worse because she's out in the backyard trying to dig up Lasher and Emileth, and she's like trying to dig a hole deep enough so she can throw Mona in it because she keeps saying Mona's dead, she needs to be buried with them. I mean, is Rowan wrong? Technically no, but like, she shouldn't be trying to bury her in the yard either. And Michael, he's like, this is beyond my capabilities of fixing. I don't know what to do here. You all need to come back to the house and help. And Lestat, Mona, and Quinn decide to go over to the house, but for several reasons. One, Lestat is kind of a little bit in love with Rowan. At least he's like super fascinated by her. You know how Lestat is, he's very capricious. But at this moment in time, he is obsessed with Rowan. Two, Mona is still looking for answers about what happened to Morrigan. That was her baby, who was a Taltos, who disappeared. So she's still looking for Morrigan to find out what happened to her. She suspects Rowan and Michael might know more information. And three, they're just going to tell Rowan and Michael about the whole vampire thing. Because one, it will fix a lot of problems they're having right now. And two, maybe they could leverage that information for more information about Morrigan. So they're like, okay, break. Let's go to the Mayfair house. So they get to the Mayfair house, and Rowan is still in the midst of her psychotic break, right? And she's carrying around a shovel, and she's acting really erratically, and she's like, Michael, Mona's here, grab her, throw her in the hole, we're burying her. So again, Lestat, he diffuses the situation by jumping in and telepathically linking with Rowan. And this time he drops a whole lot more knowledge rather than the like, everything's fine, go to sleep. This time he just drops the whole knowledge bomb of what vampires are, and that Mona is now one of them, telepathically into Rowan's mind. Now that Rowan's mind has this missing puzzle piece that she didn't have, it makes her brain start to function again. Also, Rowan is intensely attracted to Lestat. They're very kindred to each other. They have this instant connection. They're both kind of in love with each other. And I mean, yikes, she's still married to Michael, you know, like this is gonna get messy. Just a heads up. But now that Rowan isn't, you know, off the deep end anymore, they all sit down in the garden to have a good long talk about everything. And Rowan kind of explains what happened. And basically, Rowan has not been mentally well in a very long time, ever since like the events and the horror of Lasher. She has not been mentally okay. She has just been like masking this whole time, just putting patches on the dam, hoping it holds. And then Rowan gives the whole TLDR about what happened in the Mayfair Witches trilogy, which I'm not going to get into. I have a whole 3-video series on it. And she tells Mona that like she and Michael were actively looking for Morgan and Ash. They were looking for them everywhere, but they just disappeared. Like Ash liquidated all of his holdings and they were never seen again. They've been trying to find them. And Lestat in all of this is finding out that he really cares about their problems too, because he's really connected to them. One, you know, Mona is essentially kind of his daughter at this point. And two, he's in love with Rowan. So like Morgan being missing is like this big problem for both of them, and Lestat wants to help. So he's like, listen, I'll find Morgan. Like, I'm a vampire who knows how to find shit. Don't worry about it. I'll find her. So on that note, they like, you know, break for the evening, and our vampire crew goes back to Lestat's house, and, you know, Rowan and Michael stay there. And Lestat, he starts telepathically reaching out to Maharet for help to find the Taltos, because, you know, she's basically, you know, twin of the Queen of the Damned. She's been around the longest. So he's just putting that out into the ether, calling to Maharet telepathically and waiting for a response. And then it's about an hour before dawn, and Lestat, he's just kind of, you know, winding down his evening, but he senses a presence, and guess who it is? It's Sterling Oliver. And he gives Lestat a printed out email that was sent to him, care of Maharet to Lestat. He's playing secretary. Maharet basically has found the Taltos. She's like, hey, there's this whole colony of them, and they were on this island in Haiti, but like things are really rough there right now. Like I really need you to consider if you really need to go after them, because like you're walking into a minefield here. But Lestat, he loves playing in minefields, so he's like, yay, an answer! I can't wait to tell Quinn and Mona tomorrow evening. So he takes the letter, he goes to vampire bed, and he wakes up the next night. He tells Quinn and Mona, they're ecstatic that they found the Taltos, like this was quick. And so he like takes them, and they all vampire fly over to Haiti, you know, like just flying through the air. Quinn has kind of developed this ability on his own, so he can do it. Mona doesn't really know how, so she's just piggyback. She's backpacking it over to Haiti on Lestat's back. So when they get to this little island, they don't see any Taltos around, but they do find like an enormous mansion that belongs to like a drug lord, and this is like where he runs his whole operation out of. Since they don't really have any real direction to go, they just start like killing their way through henchmen, looking for someone who knows something about all the tall people who lived on this island. Where are they? What's going on? So eventually they make their way over to the big house. They're just walking around there looking for someone who might know something, and eventually they open up a room and they find a Taltos man named Oberon. They finally find a Taltos, and he's like chained to the wall, although like with enough slack, like he can go all the way around like his apartment and everything, but he's still a prisoner. So Mona, she asks him, hey, where are all the rest of the Taltos? Where's Morgan? I'm her mom. And Oberon's like, oh, really? You're her mom? You're a vampire. She's like, well, I had her before I was a vampire, bitch. Like, where's Morgan? And Oberon's like, listen, fine, you want to know what happened? I'll tell you what happened. Like, basically, shit got real bad real quick for Ash and Morgan. Oberon is actually their firstborn son, so he is, I guess, Mona's grandchild. And then after Oberon, Morgan gave birth to 5 more sons. So now there, you know, there's a lot of Taltos dudes and no females. And apparently the other sons, not Oberon, like, I guess teamed up and rebelled against their parents. And it gets really dark here, so trigger warning here, because all 5 of the sons just start assaulting Morrigan until she gives birth to a female. So yikes, this turned into a thunderdome of sexual terror real quick. So Morrigan, after all of that happens to her, she just starts withering away and doesn't talk anymore, and obviously, you know, mentally not okay. And the leader of the sedition of the brothers was this guy named Silas. And basically he wanted to overthrow Ash and then just take over the world because they can. Their birth cycles are quick. So he also secretly started poisoning Ash and Morrigan, and it just started basically a civil war in the Taltos community there. And after, you know, Ash and Morrigan are out of the way, Silas decides, hey, I'm gonna go over to the Drug Lord's Island and I'm gonna take it over because I can. So they do. He and a few of the siblings, like, you know, have guns somehow, and they like attack and they take over the Drug Lord's Island. But the problem with drug lords is that they have a lot of people around, and so a bunch of the drug lords, like, people show up and they are upset, and they have a lot more guns and people than there are Taltos. So they ended up killing all of the Taltos, so all of Silas's brothers are dead. And only a few got kept alive to be like servants. So Oberon and his 2 sisters are still alive. He doesn't know where the sisters are. So Oberon, he joins up with Mona and Quinn and Lestat, and they're going around the rest of the compound to like to see if they find any more trapped Taltos around, and also, you know, kill a bunch of henchmen and a drug lord, because fuck those guys, right? That's exactly what they do. They go around the house killing everybody. And then they finally get to the drug dealer's room, and it's this guy named Rodrigo. And so they go into his room, and the drug lord's just there chilling. And he's there with a female Taltos named Miravel, who is Oberon's sister. And the thing with Miravel is that she's very childlike in her mind and her thought process. I don't necessarily think it's necessarily a learning a disability. It's just a lot of Taltos have very innocent minds a lot of the time, which just makes Rodrigo using her for sex even grosser, because she has a child's mind in a 7-foot-tall woman body. So yikes, this is a very bad dude. No one's gonna be unhappy when Rodrigo dies. But back to the action here. Oberon, Miravel, they see each other, they run to each other, they hug, they're very happy to be reunited. And Rodrigo tries to start calling henchmen and say like, hey, come get me. But mind you, they have killed all the henchmen. He's out of henchmen. So he calls his last remaining bodyguard, Lorcan, who is another female Taltos and Oberon and Miravel's other sister. And apparently Lorcan had been working with the drug lord like the whole time, and like could have helped free them, but like chose not to. Lorcan shows up and she's like decked out like a freaking commando in a mini skirt with like machine guns and like the bandolier and everything. It's full on like weird early 2000s action movie. And they're gonna double down on that early 2000s action movie realness right here, because like there's a helicopter flying away and Rodrigo's all mad that like people are leaving the island without him. And like Lestat, he like uses his mind abilities to like blow up the helicopter. So now we have a helicopter explosion. And then like Rodrigo is like, oh fuck, I don't know what to do. And so like Lestat's like, I'm tired of dealing with you. Whoosh, and just like snaps his neck. So Rodrigo is dead and no one cares because fuck that guy, right? And Quinn, he like telepathically like restrains Lorcan so she can't run away or do any damage to them, and they disarm her, and they're like, Lorcan, you take us to where Ash and Morrigan are. You take them right now, because Rodrigo kept saying he had them on ice, quote unquote. And like Oberon is very cynical, and he knows what on ice means is that he locked them in a freezer. And they all go downstairs. Oberon leads them to like this walk-in freezer, and that's where they find Ash and Morrigan just like laying down, like holding each other, but frozen solid. And no one really knows what to do in this situation because they're frozen, but they're also Taltos. Can they survive being frozen? None of these people are medical experts here. So Lestat, he calls the only person that might know how to fix this, which is Rowan Mayfair. So he's like, Rowan, listen, we're in Haiti. We found Ash and Morrigan and their popsicles. You need to get over here. And Rowan's like, I'll be there in like an hour. And they hang up, and Rowan gets on a jet, like immediately flies over to Haiti. And she comes and examines Morgan and Ash to see, like, can they be saved? But unfortunately, she has to confirm that they're really dead. So it's like the worst ending. Like, we still had hope a little bit. Like, maybe they were frozen, but we can thaw them out. But like, no, Ash and Morgan are officially dead, which is so sad. And like, Mona devastated still. You know, she went through all of this only to not find her daughter alive. So it's a lot. However, they still have 3 additional Taltos. What are they gonna do with these Taltos? Well, first, Rowan injects Lorcan with like something that'll knock her out. So like, Lorcan is unconscious. Oberon, Miravel, they go off with Rowan because Ash always told his children as well about Rowan Mayfair and how they could trust her. So they're on the plane. They're gonna go back to New Orleans with Rowan, and I guess just move into the Mayfair house. Because what else are they gonna do? Like, they're just gonna wander around? No, they're gonna go move into the Mayfair house. Technically, they're Mayfairs, they're related. And before Rowan leaves, she and Lestat have like their big moment where we're in like early 2000s action movie realness, where like all of this chaos is behind them, but they're having like their passionate kiss. It's so early 2000s. And so Rowan leaves, she gets back on the plane because she has to take, you know, the Taltos back to New Orleans and amongst other stuff. So she leaves, and after, you know, their big passionate kiss, Lestat, he finally realizes in his black little heart that like he really loves Rowan for real. Like pure untainted love. He's not like in love with her for what she could do for him or anything selfish. He just loves her for who she is, which is an entirely new experience for him. He's been in love many times, but never unselfishly. So now that everyone's dead on this island, there's not really much more for Lestat and Quinn and Mona to do, so they all vampire fly back over to Blackwood Farm. So the next day, our vampire crew, they wake up and they go over to Mayfair Medical to, you know, say goodbye officially to Ash and Morgan. It's kind of like, you know, their memorial service here. And also they're gonna go check in on, you know, Oberon and Miravel and see what's going on with the other Taltos. And when Lorcan shows up at the funeral, everyone's like, the fuck is Lorcan doing here? And apparently Lorcan and Rowan like stayed up all night talking. What had happened was Lorcan was secretly like funneling money out of the drug lord's like secret accounts and then putting them into another secret account for, you know, her and her siblings so they would have money for when they escape. She was also sending little bits of information to the DEA so like they could like stop him. And she never really had the opportunity to kill Rodrigo because he was always there with so many armed guards around him. She could try, but she would just get killed in the process. And she couldn't just like outright call the DEA and say, hey, come get me. Because the DEA isn't gonna believe these 3 7-foot-tall people are not involved in the drug ring. They're just gonna be like, you're going to prison. And they're like, what are we gonna do in prison, guys? Like, so she was really trying her best to take care of her family in the future. She was looking down the road, but you know, she couldn't really do anything to help them in the present besides keep doing what she was doing. So even though she seemed like a bad guy, she was actually a good guy. And there's actually a lot of evidence as well, like computer evidence that would prove her claims. And Lorcan is the one that suggests that she and, you know, her siblings, Oberon and Miravel, they should all just move into the apartments that are part of Mayfair Medical. They have like a wing of apartments for like the patients' families to stay in. They can move in there because they'll be safe, because frankly, Taltos loose in the world face so many problems because of humans all the time. It's a bad thing. It's a bad place for them in the world. So if they move in here, they'll be safe. And also, there's like a sea of scientists around. They could probably come up with some type of medication or device or something that will actually be functional birth control for them, so they could actually, you know, have a normal life without spitting out babies constantly. Like, this is a good idea. And also, Lorcan has been reading medical textbooks since forever, so she wants to be a doctor. And like, Rowan also thinks she's like brilliant and like knows a lot of medical information as is. So in the end, Oberon forgives Lorcan and he's like, all right, let's go be friends. Because frankly, hanging out with Miravel is a lot for him to have to deal with because he's such a cynical bastard that had to hang out with like basically a child all day is driving him insane. He needs someone to talk to who's an adult. So he's like, all right, Lorcan, we'll be friends again, just frankly so I have someone to talk to. And then they seem flirty with each other, frankly, which I'm like, oh God. They are brother and sister, but then again, Taltos is a different genetic stream, frankly. So like, you know what? We're not going to get into it. So now that everything is like officially settled with the Taltos, Mona gives her real goodbye this time to Michael and Rowan, because with Morrigan gone, there isn't really a lot to like keep her around them anymore, and especially now that she's a vampire, it's difficult. And Michael, you know, he's a big old softie, so he's like saddened by this, but Rowan and Mona both kind of have that like mercenary quality to their personalities, so they both just kind of understand each other, where they're coming from. So she's less sad about it and more resigned. However, the side effect of that is that now Lestat and Rowan really have no reason to be around each other anymore, since Mona is taking herself out of the equation. And both Rowan and Lestat don't really know how to feel about this yet, because they're both so drawn to each other that they're gonna have to take a minute and like think about what this means. And Lestat, he keeps finding himself wandering over to Mayfair Medical like late at night, and he like stays in this like patient garden, and he just thinks about Rowan and about what he's gonna do. And also he's trying to be a better person, and like he unselfishly loves her, so he's like, should I make her into a vampire so I can keep her? Like, he's really struggling with this decision. Ultimately, he decides he's going to leave Mayfair Medical and he's going to go back to the vampires, because in the end, he's only going to end up hurting Rowan, and those guys are vampires. Like, he can't really hurt them the same way. So he goes back to Blackwood Manor to go hang out with, you know, Quinn and Mona. But when he gets there, he realizes that Quinn and Mona are not there anymore, and instead Lestat finds a note from Maharet. So what had happened is Maharet sent Cayman, who's another vampire, and a friend of hers, to go pick them up. And she tells Lestat that she's gonna take over trading Quinn and Mona for a while. Because, like, don't get me wrong, Lestat, you're doing a good job so far. But realistically, they're both so young and really don't grasp what it means to be an immortal. So I think it's best if they come stay with me for a while and like learn more about this, like, spiritually, essentially. And also Maharet just throws in a little bit of advice for Lestat going forward, that she knows he's in his own like moral dilemma over Rowan and what he should do. And she basically just says, Lestat, I believe in you, and I know you're gonna make the right decision. So it's kind of like a nice, like, cool aunt type of letter to Lestat, and I think it's exactly what he needed at that moment. But on the other side of things, now he doesn't have his vampire buddies. Lestat is alone again. So he just mopes around Blackwood Manor for a few days and like goes and sits on a tree by the cemetery and just like looks off into the mist at night, like so dramatic. After a few days, he goes over to his tree and he finds someone waiting for him, and that someone is Rowan Mayfair. Immediately, they both get very intimate with each other. Like, in Anne Rice's world, vampires don't tend to have sex, so it's mainly just kind of like hand stuff. And Rowan tells Lestat, while she really loves Michael, truly, in the end of the day, Michael deserves someone better than her, with a lot less darkness on her shoulders at all times. So she wants to be free of all of her burdens, and she wants to have Lestat take them away from her by making her into a vampire. And also, like, she's in love with him and she wants to be with him. She wants to be like vampire companions. So basically, Rowan just walked up and handed Lestat everything he wants on a silver platter. But mind you, the whole theme of this book is Lestat being introspective and growing a moral compass. What's he gonna do in this situation? And honestly, Lestat is very tempted because he's in love with Rowan, like real capital L love with Rowan. But in the end, he does kind of make the right decision, and he tells her that the world needs Rowan Mayfair far more than Rowan Mayfair needs to be with Lestat, because Rowan is a very gifted surgeon and scientist. She's going to save the world one day. The world needs her. And, deep down, Rowan also feels the same way. She knows there's so much more she could give the world as well. And that's kind of Rowan's like guiding light, is when she's giving to others and it doesn't make her go down this monstrous path. Because when she's selfish, it turns into bad stuff happening. So Lestat tells her now isn't the time for them to be together. However, it's exactly that. Now isn't the time for them to be together, but it will be time for them to be together someday. So it's basically a no for now, but Lestat is gonna like stay in her life and like keep an eye on her. And when that time comes, where she's given all she needs to give, he would make her into a vampire. So basically, their whole relationship is a not yet at this time. And Rowan agrees because, even though she's like covered in darkness all the time and she's weary, there's still some light left in her soul that Lestat has now managed to convince her is still there. So she agrees that like them being together right now isn't the best path forward. So they part ways, going into an uncertain future. And, Lestat, he's genuinely heartbroken because he really loves Rowan and he would have loved to turn her into a vampire and keep her. But he did the unselfish thing. He did what was best for another person and not for himself. So look at him. It took him all this book, but he's finally having some moral growth, is what he's been striving to do. And like, realistically, he still has some mixed feelings about having morals now. Like, wow, having morals kind of sucks, but in the end, he wants to be a better person, and I think he's proven that. So that was Blood Canticle by Anne Rice. Overall, I really enjoyed this story. It feels very much a product of its time. Like, this came out in 2003. Where like so many cheesy action movies were coming out, so a lot of like the action in this felt of the era. Like, think of Mission Impossible 2. Like, that's what this felt like at times. And also it's very self-referential, and a lot of people are either going to really get into Lestat's viewpoint in this or they're not. Personally, I really loved getting back to Lestat telling a story, because for so many books, Lestat has not been the narrator. It's been other characters. So getting back to some good old Brat Prince action was like exactly what my soul needed. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And yes, it was awkward when Anne Rice, had to put herself into the story talking about like the critical reception to Memnoch the Devil. It's not a good look. I'll be real with you. But like, I got over it because so much of this story was so fun and exciting to read. I loved all these characters, and I just liked it. I think I gave it like 4.5 stars. It's so good. I really liked it a lot. So on that note, there are 3 more books left in the Vampire Chronicles series. However, they came out over a decade later. So like, I really do believe Blood Canticle was the planned ending of the series. And then Anne decided she's got a couple more stories to tell. And in the meantime, let me know in the comments down below, do you like books that are self-referential? Like, do you like them breaking the fourth wall, so to speak? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, make sure you give it a like. If you want to see more videos, make sure you subscribe. And if you want cool exclusive content, including early access to videos and a book club, you can consider becoming a channel member or a patron. Links for that are in the description down below. And on that note, I will see you guys soon. Goodbye.